Back to our renewable electricity shambles and our national energy self-harm. I told you at the top of the program about expert analysis that shows major flaws in two crucial government energy documents. They are the CSIRO's GenCost report that looks at the comparative costs of electricity generation by source, and the integrated system plan of the Australian Energy Market Operator, or AEMO, that sets out how to build the grid, reduce the emissions and make sure we have reliable and affordable power. Data scientist and now energy program head for the Centre for Independent Studies, Aidan Morrison, says inputs to the modelling are faulty, failing to work in all the transmission costs, for instance. And he explains in his vodcast how tens of billions of dollars spent on transmission lines help the renewable energy companies without adding to their costs, but do add significantly to the costs for customers.
Remember when we explained before that to continue decarbonising beyond a certain point, we either had to waste some energy or start moving it, either through space or time, using transmission or storage. And we had to be super careful about protecting consumers in that, because whilst the transmission was paid entirely by consumers, when we invest in storage and new generators that might have extra wastage, at least those costs have to be exposed to normal commercial pressures.
So I decided to catch up with Aidan and I asked him whether these crucial government documents deliberately come up with findings that are favourable to renewable energy.
Yeah, I think that is the case. It seems very strange. They make that headline claim that renewables are the cheapest, but they don't actually do a fair comparison. And the real problem at the bottom of it is they don't incorporate the full system cost. Now, CSIRO has actually since admitted this about their GenCost report. They've admitted that they were only trying to do the costs that an investor would face, not counting the costs that a consumer would end up facing, which includes all the cost of the transmission and storage. So they basically pretended all the costs out to 2030 were sunk costs and wouldn't effectively impact your power bill, when in fact out to 2030 we need to spend a huge amount on transmission, Snowy Hydro 2.0, a range of other firming initiatives, and they just pretended those costs didn't really exist. So that was a really clear one, and there are lots of similar mistakes in the integrated system plan produced by the Australian Energy Market Operator, which is the kind of bedrock, the main plan for our energy transition, and they don't cost enormous parts of our system either. They just simply don't cost any of the rooftop solar, they don't cost any of the batteries that they assume people will buy to support the grid, and they don't cost what it'll take to get people to shift their driving habits if they all buy electric vehicles. They assume we'll all charge at a time that suits the grid. And yes, so there's enormous costs that are required to support renewables that just simply aren't incorporated into these major plans.
It's quite incredible, and one of the key ones you referred to there is the way they don't actually factor into the cost equation any of those transmission costs that are built up before 2030. In fact, that means transmission lines that are still being built now, the cost of those is not factored in. Now, when we're talking about all those, are we talking about costs of $100 billion or more that are deliberately not factored in?
Good question. On transmission alone, Chris, it's probably not $100 billion or more. There's tens of billions, multiple tens of billions for the transmission. But at the moment, it's probably not quite hundreds of billions. I'd say the batteries are the ones that probably reach up to the over 100 billion. If you think about the amount of batteries that they assume people will buy, power walls, etc., that would be absolutely tremendous. And yeah, it looks like I would say that if you try to include those, you end up with power prices going much, much higher than they already are. Probably 50%. Maybe even doubling by 2040. Those are the kind of initial projections that I do when I try to factor in some of those additional costs.
Now, one of the incredible things, the fascinating aspects of your work is when you look at this and you look at the plan then to build out the system in the future, you say that their plan of building out transmission lines, expensive transmission connections first, actually helps the renewable energy companies but doesn't help consumers. Why would we go down that path?
It's a really good question, and that's one of the most important questions that the ISP should answer. Which bit do you front load with first of all? And I think it's the case that the renewable energy investors, they would love to front load with transmission as much as possible, and that's what it looks like these reports tend to favour. And one of the obvious reasons for that is that means that all their power can get to market straight away. They've got a buyer at the other end of the line. There's no constraint there, and that makes their business case looks particularly rosy. But the alternative might be that they actually build more batteries on site. So instead of trying to send all their power down the line in the middle of the day when it's sunny, they just store some on site and send it at night. And that might be much better for the overall system. But that doesn't appear to be the system that's favoured by the integrated system plan. And of course, they can't know they get the right answer when they include a whole bunch of batteries at the other end of the power line as essentially free, which is what the integrated system plan does. They assume that all the home batteries are not really part of the system cost, which is a really terrible problem with that plan.
When I look at this complicated system and the complicated plan to complete it, I confront two big questions. The first of those is cost. Are we building the most cost-effective national electricity grid?
That's not clear to me, and it's certainly I don't see how you could have a proper plan for what is the lowest cost grid unless you're running a plan that includes all the costs. And it's quite simply the case that the integrated system plan does not include all the costs. They don't include things like Snowy Hydro 2.0. They don't include any of the transmission plans that they think that state governments have already committed to that aren't yet built yet. All those things should be up for grabs to see whether they're actually the best plan. And I think there's great evidence that they're not actually part of the best plan anymore. But the integrated system plan doesn't try to adjust those or actually see whether there's a better way to do this at all. And it certainly doesn't consider something like nuclear energy. So the integrated system plan only says if we assume all the governments get their way and we assume that they build all the projects they're all committed to, how then do we fill in all the gaps? And that's basically comparing maybe two different expensive plans. They've found the cheapest of very expensive plans, but haven't really compared it to what might be the lowest cost. There's no real effort in the integrated system plan to find the lowest cost system overall. Just the lowest cost one that fits with everything that governments have already committed to.
Yeah, you mentioned nuclear there. Of course, they use these plans and these cost estimates to say that nuclear would be too expensive, but they do it in a way that actually makes that an inevitable outcome. This leads me to the second big question, and that is capability. This renewables plus storage model on the back of all this extensive transmission network, is it actually capable of delivering the electricity we need? Or are we going on a frolic here to try and produce a storage plus renewables plus storage system that's never been completed anywhere else in the world yet?
That's a really great question, and as it happens, I'm actually quite confident that no, the integrated system plan does not model a reliable system. That might be news to a lot of people, but that was something that was revealed. It can be revealed by the way, diving deep into the models and seeing what they actually do and how their optimization process works. But the fact that the ISP, the integrated system plan, is not actually a reliable system was also admitted to on the 15th of August at a webinar where one of the head modelers in the Department of Climate Change and Energy admitted that it was never intended to produce the reliability requirements that are needed. Essentially, it's not a fully reliable system. We'd actually need to pad it out with a whole bunch of extra, maybe storage, maybe even more transmission, maybe it's extra generators. But the way the ISP works, there's no claim, there's no serious claim that can be supported that says that on its own would be a reliable system. It hasn't been specified to do that at all. So I think there's every chance that we even build everything in the integrated system plan, and that still doesn't produce a reliable system.
Yeah, we get rid of the emissions, but we don't have reliable energy. What a disaster. Congratulations on your new role with the Centre for Independent Studies, Aidan, and thanks for chatting. We'll keep in touch.
Thanks very much, Chris.